My mom ignored my 17 calls, but a stranger saved my life. I almost didn't make it to 35. Not because of something you'd see in a movie, not a car accident, not some freak event, because I was on my bathroom floor, my body failing me, and the one person in this world who was supposed to love me without conditions looked at her phone, saw my name lighting up the screen, and turned it face down on a table. 17 times. I counted every single one. I counted while my vision pulled in at the edges like a curtain closing. I counted while my hands shook so badly I kept dropping the phone and picking it back up. I counted while I pressed my back harder against the cold porcelain of the bathtub and whispered out loud to an empty room, "Please, please just pick up." She never did. But somebody showed up anyway. Somebody who didn't know my last name, didn't know my history, didn't owe me a single thing. And what that person did, and what happened weeks later at a dinner table with my whole family sitting there thinking they had already won, is the reason I'm still here to tell this story. Keep that in mind as we go, because the dinner part, I wasn't ready for what happened, and neither were they. My name is Celeste. I'm 34 years old. I work as a home health aide, which means my days are spent inside strangers' homes, helping with medications, meals, mobility, sitting beside people when their bodies don't cooperate, holding hands during the hard hours. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I have never once resented a moment of it. The irony of that took me a long time to name. I grew up in a house where money was always running out and love was always running on conditions nobody ever wrote down, but everybody somehow enforced. My dad left when I was 9. After that, my mom built herself an identity around the sacrifice, the single mother doing it all alone, holding the family together. And maybe she believed it. Maybe she needed to believe it just to keep going. But it was me making sure my little sister had breakfast before school. It was me learning to stretch the groceries across 2 weeks when they were supposed to last one. It was me who figured out early and quietly that asking for things produced a specific look. Not anger exactly, just this slow, tired dismissal that made you feel foolish for having needs in the first place. I was never the daughter she led with. Not the one she called first with good news, not the one she mentioned at church or showed off at gatherings. I was the one who handled things, reliable, steady, invisible in the way that truly reliable people become invisible, because when something works, you stop noticing it. I showed up for everyone, every single time, without being asked and without complaint, until the night nobody showed up for me. If you have ever been the person everyone leans on and the first one they forget the moment you need something in return, stay with me. Tell me in the comments if you've ever been let down at your lowest. I want to read every one. Now let's go. I have a chronic autoimmune condition, diagnosed at 26. My immune system periodically turns on itself, attacks my own tissue, my joints, my stability for reasons that aren't fully understood even now. I've learned to live alongside it. I know the rhythms of my own body better than most people know their morning commute. I know the difference between a rough day and a dangerous one. That Tuesday night in October was dangerous. I woke up from the couch around midnight, and the pain was already there, not arriving, already there, like it had been building while I slept and had simply been waiting for me to open my eyes and notice it. It wasn't the familiar dull pressure I managed daily. This was different, sharp, moving. It traveled through my joints the way electricity moves through wire, fast and without asking permission. My vision was already soft and shrinking at the edges. When I stood up, I had to grab the arm of the couch with both hands just to stay vertical. I knew. I have always known what it feels like when this becomes real. I grabbed my phone. I didn't call 911. I know how that sounds, but I didn't call a friend either. I called my mom. Because there's something that gets built into you when you are a child, something that sits deeper than logic or history and all the accumulated evidence of a lifetime that makes your hands reach for her when fear becomes primal. She installed that reflex in me. It doesn't consult your experience. It doesn't weigh the odds. It just fires. The phone rang 4 times. Voicemail. I called again immediately. This time it rang twice and dropped faster than a normal call would. She'd seen it. She'd pressed decline. I know the difference between a phone that rings out naturally and a phone whose owner just made a choice. I texted, "Mom, I need help." I watched the check marks turn from gray to blue. She'd read it. The screen stayed perfectly still. Nothing came back. I called again and again. I made it to the bathroom floor somewhere around the 6th call, sitting with my back against the cold tub because the cold was the only thing still grounding me, still keeping me present. By the 12th call, I wasn't tracking time correctly anymore. By the 15th, I'd stopped forming full sentences, just the same 2 words cycling over and over, barely above a breath. Please. Please. 16. 17. The phone sat heavy in my hand. The room was completely quiet, and that quiet, that specific, unbroken silence after the 17th unanswered call was the most alone I have ever felt in my entire life. And then someone knocked on my front door. Her name was Ruth. My neighbor, late 60s, maybe pushing 70, with a small front porch where she spent her mornings with a watering can and a cup of coffee she nursed slowly. We had exchanged nods in the driveway. That was the full and complete history of our relationship before that night. She told me later, when I was well enough to ask, that she had been awake and noticed my car's interior light had been on for hours, that something about it bothered her in a way she couldn't explain, that she almost talked herself out of checking, almost went back inside where it was warm, almost decided it wasn't her business. She knocked anyway. I don't have a clear memory of getting to the door. I remember it opening. I remember the rush of cold October air and Ruth's face in the gap, and then I remembered the exact moment her expression shifted. It wasn't alarm exactly, it was recognition. She saw me, and she knew, and she didn't waste a single second on questions whose answers were already obvious. She said, calmly and without any panic in her voice, "I'm calling for help right now." And she did. Then she put her phone in her robe pocket, took my arm carefully, walked me back down the hallway, and lowered herself down onto those cold porcelain tiles beside me. In her robe, in her house slippers, at midnight on a Tuesday. She took my hand. We sat there together on that floor, listening to the distant sound of sirens getting closer, and Ruth didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance or questions or anything that might have made it about her. She just held my hand firmly and said quietly, close enough that I could hear it clearly, "I've got you. I'm right here. You're not alone." I have heard many things in my life that I needed to hear. I have never needed 4 words more than I needed those 4 words in that moment. She stayed exactly where she was until the paramedics came through the door and the hallway filled with light and noise and people who knew what to do. And even then, she didn't leave right away. She stood in the doorway of the bathroom until I was on the stretcher, and she said, "I'll check on you tomorrow." Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like she had always been there. She hadn't, but she was there when it counted, and I have never forgotten the weight of her hand holding mine on that floor. The doctors told me later that another 30 minutes without intervention would likely have produced a very different outcome. I have allowed myself to understand what that means without sitting inside it for too long. I was stabilized within the hour. I was lying in a hospital bed, hollowed out in the specific way your body feels after something genuinely serious has happened to it, staring at the ceiling and just breathing when my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. My mom. I picked up. She said, "Why were you blowing up my phone like that? I was at your sister's recital. You can't just call 17 times, Celeste. You know how that looks." I didn't say anything. I held the phone against my ear and I looked at a water stain on the ceiling tile directly above my head, and I breathed in and I breathed out. I felt something move in my chest, slow, deep, settling that I couldn't name precisely. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was something quieter and heavier than either of those, something that felt like it was finding a permanent address. She came to the hospital the next morning. I want to be fair here, because being fair matters to me, even when it's difficult. She came. I know that some people's mothers don't even do that. But there is coming and there is coming, and the difference between them is everything. I heard her before I saw her. Her voice in the hallway, pitched at exactly the volume she uses when she wants to be noticed without appearing to try. I've been sick with worry. I haven't slept at all. I heard a nurse respond to her, something gentle and brief, and I heard my mom receive it with the particular warmth she reserves for strangers. Open, gracious, visibly concerned. The performance was already in full run before she came through my door. She walked in. She looked at me. She leaned over and straightened my blanket once, the precise way you'd fix a throw pillow on a couch while passing by. Then she sat down in the chair beside my bed and spent the next 20 minutes talking about traffic, the parking situation, how difficult the drive had been, how stressful everything had been for her since last night. She did not ask what the doctors said. She did not ask if the pain had felt like. She did not ask if I had been scared lying on that floor by myself. She looked at me the way you look at a situation that you are actively, patiently waiting to stop being your responsibility. After 40 minutes, she said she had things to handle and she'd check in. I watched her walk out of the room and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me with how quiet it was, she came so that she could say she came. That is all that visit was. Not for me. For the story she needed to be able to tell about herself. What happened in the week that followed, I was not prepared for. And I should have been, but somehow I wasn't. My cousin Tamara called a few days after I got home. She used the voice, the careful one, the cushioning voice, the one people use when they have already decided that what they're about to say will hurt you and they've chosen to deliver it anyway. She said, "Your mama's been talking to people. She's telling everyone you just panicked, that you've been under a lot of stress and probably need to talk to someone." I let that sentence exist in the air between us for a moment. Then my Aunt Lorraine texted 4 days after I came home from the hospital. "Your mama loves you, baby. You always did have a flair for the dramatic." I read that sentence so many times that the words separated from their meaning and became just shapes. A flair for the dramatic. I had been on a bathroom floor at midnight, my body failing, making 17 calls that went completely unanswered, and the family had returned their verdict. Drama. Then I found out about the group chat. My cousin Deja, the one person in my extended family who has never performed, never chosen the comfortable side when it disagreed with the honest one, texted me a screenshot with no introduction, just the image. I opened it. It was a family group chat. I was not in it. There were dozens of messages across multiple days, threads about my episode, my mental state, my pattern of seeking attention. They had discussed me at length, made decisions about me, coordinated responses to me, together, in a room I hadn't known existed, without my knowledge and without my presence. They had agreed collectively to reduce contact with me until I settled down. They had used language to describe me that I will not repeat here fully because even now, reading it does something physical to my chest. They were completely, entirely certain they had already handled this. I sat on my couch for a long time after I finished reading it. I didn't cry right away. I read it straight through, slowly, start to finish, twice. And somewhere during the second read, I felt something change. Not break, change, like a posture I'd held for decades, finally releasing the tension it had been built around. The part of me that had spent 34 years quietly hoping these people would one day see me clearly. That part stood down, gently and finally, and without drama. I let myself grieve, properly this time. Not the health scare, my body was healing. I grieved the mother I had spent my whole life reshaping myself trying to deserve. I grieved the family that would have picked up on the first call, or the fifth, or the ninth. I felt the full specific weight of being surrounded by people who shared my blood and still being profoundly, completely alone among them. And then I got up, went to my laptop, opened a folder I had been quietly adding to for 6 years without letting myself fully examine what I was building. Here is what they did not know. My therapist had suggested years ago that I document my interactions with my family, not to build a case, as a sanity practice, because what happens when people spend years consistently minimizing your experience is that you start doing it to yourself. You start editing your own memory to match the version they're insisting on. The journal was so I could return to what had actually happened. So I had journals, 6 years of them. I had screenshots going back to 2019. I had voicemails saved to cloud storage because my therapist had told me to stop deleting things that upset me before I had had time to process them. I had a log, specific, time-stamped, organized, of every time I had reached out in genuine need and been minimized, redirected, dismissed, or simply ignored. I was not dramatic. I was documented. 17 missed calls. I had proof of every single one. And that was only where it started. At work, Diane noticed before I said a word. My supervisor had spent over 20 years as a social worker before moving into healthcare administration. She carries that history with her, in the way she observes a room, in the particular quality of her attention. She pulled me aside one afternoon, closed her office door, and didn't ask if I was okay, because she could already see the answer on my face. She just said, "Talk to me." So I did. Everything. In order. The calls, the hospital, the 40-minute visit, the group chat, Aunt Lorraine's text. I watched Diane's face while I talked, and what I noticed, what stayed with me, was that she didn't look shocked, not even a little. She looked like someone who was reading a map they'd seen many versions of before, and could already see where all the roads led. When she stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. Just quiet. Then she said, "What you experienced was real. You are not confused about any of it." She let that sit for a moment before continuing. "I want to give you the name of an attorney who works with family documentation cases, not because you have to do anything with it, just so you understand what options are available to you." I had not known that options were something I was allowed to have. I wrote the name down. On the other side of all of this, my family had grown comfortable. My mom was making her rounds, reaching out to relatives I saw at holidays, building her narrative carefully, positioning herself as the patient and worried mother, navigating a daughter who was struggling. Aunt Lorraine had graduated from texting me to calling my mom every few days, specifically to check on her. They were unified. They were settled. They were absolutely certain I would do what I had always done, which was absorb it quietly and return as though nothing had happened, because that was the pattern I had established, and they had no reason to expect it to change. Then the invitation arrived. My mom sent it through my sister, not to me directly, through my sister, which was its own kind of signal. A Sunday dinner. The whole family, time to move forward, put this behind us, be a family again. She framed it as reconciliation. I recognized it immediately for what it was, a room preloaded with people who had already agreed on the story, with enough collective presence to make resistance feel indistinguishable from instability. A setup designed so that I would either fall back into line or confirm everything they'd already decided about me. I said yes. I went. I brought my folder. The house smelled like pot roast when I came through the door. She always made pot roast for the moments she wanted the room to feel warm and resolved before the actual resolution had happened. I recognized that smell the way you recognize a tactic that had been deployed on you enough times to become familiar. It used to work. I noticed that it didn't anymore. Everyone was already seated when I walked in. My mom, my sister, both aunts, two cousins I'd seen maybe twice in 3 years, all of them arranged around the table like they had been there for a while, like they had been waiting. The staging was deliberate. I was the last to arrive, which made me the subject of the room from the moment I stepped through the door, before I had said a single word or sat in a single chair. My mom stood up. She crossed the room and hugged me, and she held on precisely 1 beat longer than felt natural, that specific extra beat she uses to communicate feeling to observers. Then she stepped back, tilted her head in the way that reads as tender concern to anyone who doesn't know what it actually is, and said softly, "We're all just so worried, baby. You've been pulling away from everyone who loves you, and that isn't healthy. We just want our Celeste back." Heads nodded around the table, almost synchronized. My sister was looking at her plate. I sat down, placed my bag on the table without any rush, reached in slowly, pulled out a manila folder and set it down directly in front of me. I did not open it yet. The room changed, not with any sound or visible reaction, just a shift, the particular atmospheric shift that happens when something appears in a scene that the scene was not written to include. My mom's eyes moved to the folder, then to my face, then back to the folder. Her smile didn't move. That's what I noticed first, and that's what I still think about. Her smile held its position with complete steadiness, the way a practiced expression holds when the face beneath it is working very hard. I opened the folder. "I want to share some things with everyone," I said. My voice was level, and I was not performing level. I genuinely was. The anger had run its course weeks ago. What remained on the other side of it was something I had never felt before in relation to this family, a clean, quiet certainty. First, the call log, printed directly from my phone records. 17 outgoing calls, each one timestamped, spanning 41 minutes. Every single one unanswered. I slid it slowly to the center of the table. Nobody touched it. Nobody looked away from it. Second, the screenshot from the family group chat, the one in which exactly 3 minutes after my 17th unanswered call, my mom had responded to something my sister posted with a laughing reaction. 3 minutes. While I was whispering please in a phone on a bathroom floor, she was reacting to something funny in a group chat I didn't know existed. I placed it on top of the call log. Someone at the table shifted in their chair. The sound was very small in the silence. Third, the letter from my doctor. Official letterhead, clinical language, a precise medical account of what had been occurring in my body that night, and a direct statement about what the likely outcome would have been without timely intervention. I set it on the stack. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove marked the seconds. That was all there was. My mom's voice, when it finally arrived, carried none of the warmth it had walked in with. The softness was completely gone, like a costume removed backstage. "Where did you get that?" I said. "From my own life. Every time you told me I was exaggerating, I wrote it down. Every time you made me feel like needing something from you was an imposition on your time, I wrote it down. Every time I reached out and got nothing back, I saved it. I have 6 years of documentation. I'm not dramatic, I'm documented." I watched my Aunt Lorraine look down at the tablecloth and stay there. I watched my cousin press back very slowly in her chair, creating as much distance as she could from what was happening without technically standing up. I watched my sister. She was crying quietly, her eyes fixed on something that wasn't in the room. I have thought a lot about what she was seeing in that moment. I don't think it was about me at all. My mom started crying too, louder than my sister. Her hand went to her chest, palm flat, fingers spread, that gesture she has used my entire life to signal feeling to whoever is in the room. She looked around the table. Nobody moved toward her. I want you to understand what that means. In every prior version of this kind of moment, someone would already be up. Someone would have a hand on her shoulder. That movement, toward her, to comfort her, to restore the equilibrium around her, had always been automatic and immediate. This time, the room stayed still. I watched her register it, watched her feel the stillness, feel the absence of the reflexive rush to surround her. I watched something cross her face that I had never seen there before. Not guilt exactly, but something in the neighborhood of recognition. I let the quiet hold for just a moment longer. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," I said. "I need everyone in this room to hear that clearly. I'm not here to punish or humiliate or burn anything down. I came because everyone sitting at this table needed to know that I know. All of it. And I am done. I am completely done pretending that I don't." I looked around the table. I made eye contact with each person and I held it long enough to be sure. The woman who kept me alive that October night lives next door to me. She has never been invited to a birthday. She doesn't know my middle name. She has never once sat at a table like this one. But she saw a light on in my car at midnight, and something in her said to check. She got down on a cold bathroom floor in her robe and her house slippers, and she held my hand until help came. I picked up my folder, placed it back in my bag, stood up. She did what no one in this room could be bothered to do. I just want each of you to sit with what that means about love and what it means about this family. I walked out. Behind me, the pot roast sat warm on the stove. The clock kept marking time above it, and not one person said my name. The weeks that came after were the quietest of my life. Not the quiet of emptiness, I want to be precise about that. The quiet of a house after you finally, fully stopped straining to hear a sound that was never coming. The quiet of a person who stopped bracing for impact. I stopped managing other people's feelings about the choices I was making for my own life. I stopped pre-apologizing, pre-softening, pre-explaining myself into something smaller and more palatable. Diane's attorney helped me formalize the documentation, not for any legal proceeding, simply to create a record that existed somewhere outside my own memory. Evidence for myself that I had not constructed any of it, that every bit of it had been exactly as real as I knew it was. Ruth checked on me the morning after I came home from the hospital, as promised. She stood at my door with a container of soup, the homemade kind, the kind that takes actual time, and she handed it over and said, "You don't have to talk. I just wanted you to have this." I did talk, eventually, a little more each time she knocked. She never pushed. She just kept showing up. We started having Sunday dinners together, nothing formal or planned. It built on its own, the way real things do. She makes strong tea and she talks about her garden with the same specific enthusiasm that some people reserve for world events. She asks real questions and she waits for the real answers. She remembers what you told her last week. She has become something I didn't have a word for at first, not a replacement for anything I lost, not a stand-in, just a person who saw me, actually saw me, and kept choosing to show up. Some weeks, that has been everything. 3 weeks after the dinner, my mom left a voicemail. She cried through most of it. I sat and listened to the whole thing without interruption. And even in that voicemail, even with all that space and all those seconds and no one there to perform for, she said, "I don't understand why you're doing this to our family." Not, "I should have picked up." Not, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Not, "I heard what you said at that table and I've been sitting with it." Doing this to our family, after all of it, still organized around the same center. I listened once, I saved it to the cloud folder where everything else lives. I did not call back. Not from anger, not from the satisfaction of withholding something she wanted, but because I had finally, after 34 years of reaching, adjusting, reducing, hoping, stopped confusing the fact that she was my mother with the idea that she had ever actually chosen me. I had treated those two things as the same thing my entire life. They had never been the same thing, not once. I don't know exactly what Ruth was thinking the night she decided not to go back inside. I've asked her and she tilts her head a little and says something like, "I just had a feeling something wasn't right." That's all, a feeling. She followed it into the cold and down the block and up my front steps, and it saved my life. I think about that a lot. Some nights I'm sitting across from her and the tea is strong and the kitchen smells like whatever she's been baking and the evening is unhurried and warm, and I think about that bathroom floor. I think about call 17 going dark in my hand. I think about what 30 more minutes of that silence might have meant, and then I think about a woman in a robe who had a feeling and decided it was worth acting on. She didn't know me. She didn't owe me. She knocked anyway. Some people never get a Ruth. They go through their whole lives reaching for people who decline the calls, and they never get someone who shows up uninvited in house slippers to sit with them on a cold floor. I think about those people often. I think about what it costs a person to keep reaching without ever being caught. I almost didn't get her either. She almost went back inside. I'm still living into what it means that a stranger gave me something my own mother couldn't. I'm still understanding what that says about love, about what it actually requires of a person, and the difference between people who are present in your life and people who simply occupy space nearby. I don't have a finished answer. I don't think the question is the kind that finishes.
But here is what I know now, in a way I didn't know it before that October night. Love is not biology. It is not the fact of being related. It is not obligation or proximity or showing up to the hospital so you can say you showed up. Love is a knock on a door at midnight from someone who almost didn't stop. Love is getting down on a cold floor in your house slippers because someone needed a hand, and you happened to be the one close enough to give it. Love is choosing someone, actively, in a specific moment when it costs you something, for no reason except that they needed to be chosen. My mother gave me life. Ruth made sure I kept it. And I will spend the rest of my time here learning how to be more like the woman who knocked. If you've ever needed your family to show up and they didn't, you know this pain does not age out. It doesn't soften on its own. It just waits. If that's your story, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments who showed up for you when your family couldn't. A neighbor, a coworker, a stranger with no reason to care who cared anyway. Every name matters. And if no one has shown up for you yet, this community sees you. You are not invisible here. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. If this story stayed with you, let it reach someone else. That's all I'm asking. Because somewhere out there is a person on a bathroom floor counting calls that aren't being answered, and they need to know that the story doesn't end there. It didn't end there for me.